Haters, I'm back. It's an awesome thing to be able to survive. Animal life has an inborn instinct of survival. We as human beings have the same mechanism in our bodies. The human body will fight to live up until the very last. When a person has been stripped of any and everything, there is still a hint in their heart of wanting to make it. Is that right? No matter how bad things are, if they just have a thread of hope, they will cling to what we call it survival. Nature calls it the survival of the fittest. I want to live. I want to make it, even though I have encountered some of the most demeaning and downright devastating happenings in my life. It's wonderful if you can strive. It's great if you can arrive. But can we be honest with ourselves? Sometimes it's a miracle if we can just survive this everyday thing we call life. Tap somebody on the shoulder and say, I know that's right. When you have suffered deep wounds, when you have been through a brutal battle, when you have had to fight incredible enemies and surmount incalculable odds, when you have been counted out, left for dead, it's a miracle just to survive this rat's race. But I believe right here in this very room, I see some survivors. Is that right? I believe I'm preaching to somebody who have been to hell and back, walked through hell and high water, but somehow you made it. Turn to your neighbor and say, I made it. You've been kicked to the curb, but you got up, dusted yourself off your seat of your pants, dusted off your shoulders, and kept on stepping. You've been sick, stressed out, broke, busted, disgusted, and frustrated, but somehow you kept yourself together. You survived. Am I talking to anybody who knows what I'm talking about? Touch your neighbor and say, you've just been touched by a miracle. I wasn't supposed to make it. I shouldn't be alive, but I'm still here. I'm like baby's kids. I don't die, I just multiply. I'm a survivor, so is it all right if I call on this man in our text that can somehow show us and define to us what it is to be a survivor? This man is a peripheral character. He's on the outskirts of the story. He's not the main participator of these events. He's just in the neighborhood. Say neighborhood. Sometimes it's just good to get a peripheral point of view. Sometimes we can learn from someone who is just hanging around the main situation. This man's presence is pivoted and purposeful. He's living his life in obscurity. But somehow he shows up on God's radar. I don't care what you say. Sometimes God will use the most useless person to do something for him. Oh, come on. His presence is almost overlooked because his presence, get this good, is limited to only 6 verses in this entire episode, which is encased in one of David's stories. That's why so many people miss the spiritual truth of his life, because this man is planted and positioned up against a giant of a biblical character by the name of David. However, there are some powerful points and principles in the details of this story that defines this man's journey. Is it all right if I take my time and describe the story? Because the majority of us I have discovered that for every David you discover in life, there are 2 or 3 or more nameless faceless individuals like this man who shows up in our text. In other words, everybody can't be a David. Let me try that again. Everybody can't sing like Robert. When you look at, everybody can't sing like Kim, but when you look at David's situation, he came from a family of 8, which implies, listen, he came from a family of 8, which implies that your chances of being a David is 1 out of 8. Your chances of making it big in the pros, my brothers, is even less. Movie star, model, music star, or whatever. But isn't it nice to know you don't have to be a star to be in God's show? Just show up and watch God work in your life. Can I get a few Christians in here to just wave your hands and testify that you don't know how, but when you gave your life fully to Christ, somehow you made it. Come on, give the Lord a hand, pray. Somehow you made it. Can you just high five your neighbor and say, I may not be a David, but I'm a survivor. Y'all didn't say it like you mean it. I may not be a David, but I'm a survivor. This man, David, meets at a critical intersection in each of their lives. One man is left for dead, and the other man is trying to find his family. David found this man while they were seeking to recover what the enemy had stolen from them. This man was a servant of an Amalekite who had left him for dead because he became sick on the journey. This man's owner thought nothing of him. He just left him. No water, no medicine, no nothing. This man was kicked to the curb. Oh, come on. Haven't you felt that way before? Come on. Haven't you been kicked to the curb? Haven't you been dumped, dropped, kicked, dismissed, disrespected, disregarded, discarded, abandoned, and forsaken? Come on, haven't this happened to you? Oh, y'all sitting there like y'all, I guess none of y'all never had this situation. And you're like, Johnny said they discouraged him, but he kept on. He was no longer viewed as an asset. He was now seen as a liability. His value to those who owned him had been significantly diminished. So they left him in a field to die by the side of the road. I know somebody here already knows what I'm talking about. My mother says, son, live, but don't get old. The other day she added to that. She said, son, live, get old, but don't get sick. I wish somebody talked to me. Somebody here can understand my view, for you know what it is to be kicked by the side of a curb. You ought to know what it is to be dumped, dropped, dismissed, forsaken, disrespected. I believe I'm stirring somebody's Kool-Aid in here. That's why y'all ain't saying nothing. You fed him, put clothes on his back, money in his pocket, only to find out he's been cheating and disrespecting you. Giving him your hard-earned money only to find out he's spending it on some other woman. He's telling you I have a headache like you do. Playing your game. I'm tired, and finally when he comes around to it, it's a messed up situation. Am I at somebody's house? You live in the ground. He walks on. You trying to pull him up by his bootstraps, only to discover that his body is here with you, but his mind is way on the Somebody knows the deep and abiding pain of being abandoned. But there was a time when you was loved, appreciated, acknowledged, celebrated, and treated as though you were the best thing, better than sliced bread. Now, for some reason or another, your value in the view of others have changed. Your cell phone stopped going off. The IMs stopped coming in. The emails stopped flowing. No more Instagrams. The calls stopped dropping. The flowers no longer delivered. The nice treatment was withdrawn. No more candy. No more roses. Flowers dried up. And you were made to know that your company was no longer desired. Your presence was not needed. Your input was no longer solicited. You became one of the many known as the unnecessary, unneeded, undesired, and unwanted. I know it's the Sabbath. You're working real hard to keep it way down on the down low because you don't want anybody to know what you've been through. You want everybody to think that you've always been wanted, something special, something ordinary, extraordinary, and desired. But there's somebody on your road that's feeling me. Tap, tap, tap your neighbor and say, he must be talking about you. There's somebody on your road that knows the psychic trauma of going from wanted to unwanted, from needed to unneeded, from special to ordinary, from accepted to rejected, and when you have to move from one to the other without your consent, I believe that's a painful experience. This man didn't want to be sick. He wanted to get well as soon as he could get well, but nevertheless, they dropped him and left him on the curb. You didn't ask to have the skin color that you have. You didn't ask to have the hair texture that you have. Your lips, your size nose, your hips, a gender that you possess. But this text points out that folk will every once in a while, regardless of whether or not you're black, white, green, brown, or yellow, they will dump you, drop you, abandon you, and discard you and kick your hips to the curb. Now, I don't mind. I don't mind. There's some times that you ought to be kicked to the curb. There's sometimes when you dating somebody and he's still living at his daddy's house and he's 30-something years old, you ought to kick him to the curb. If you got to go pick him up, I wish y'all talk to me. If you got to go pick him up in your car, you ought to kick him. If you got to pay when y'all go out, or he got to say, let's go to McDonald's, you ought to kick him to the curb. Just because you no longer want to pop, lock, and drop it like it's hot, and shake it fast and back that thing up, you ought to, and he ain't bought that ring, you ought to kick him to the curb. Y'all ain't talking. I could truly understand it if the brother had been lazy, trifling, but he had been faithful, dutiful, and responsible. And yet for all that you took and all that you did. I can feel some of your pain. You was dumped. You were discarded, forsaken, and you were kicked to the curb for no apparent reason. Anybody in here know what I'm talking about? There he was, left to die, and I believe many things went through this man's mind. Because when you have been kicked to the curb and left to die, you don't have anything to do but think. Is that right? He started thinking, what have I done? What should I have done differently? How long is it going to take for this to be over? Why can't I just go ahead on and die? But notice, though he was left to die, the text says he didn't die. Can I hang out right there on that curb? Because I think that's the first element in the testimony of this man. He's telling you that being left for dead does not necessarily mean that you have to die. Uh-oh. Is it all right if I say that again for those of you who might have missed it? Being left for dead does not necessarily mean that you have to die. Look at your neighbor. Say, neighbor, I ain't dead yet. Y'all ain't say it loud. I say, neighbor, I ain't dead yet. He was still important to God. He was still important to who? I said he was important to who? Listen. Don't ever tie the value and the meaning and the significance of your life to the attitudes and the opinions and the ideas that people have about your life. Woo! I said, don't ever tie the value and the meaning and the significance of your life to the attitudes and the opinions and the ideas that people have about your life. Because your meaning, your significance, your value ought not to be determined by them. It ought to be determined by you and God. Oh, come here. Remember, when people see you as useless, God sees you as useful. You are valuable enough for God to wake you up each morning. I can't get no veteran Christians in here to shout. This man was left for dead, and he was good as dead in the minds of those who dumped him. He was an easy prey for any predator that wanted to take him out, and yet he remained alive. God protected him from sunstroke. God kept him alive. Tap somebody and say, nobody but God kept you from the enemy. I say nobody but God kept you from the enemy. Yeah. He did it because he's not finished with you yet. He did it because there's rhyme and reason as to why you are and where you are positioned right now in your life. Woo. Listen, if you ever doubt your own importance and value, all you have to do is from this day forward, look back over your shoulder and see where the Lord has brought you from. Look back over your shoulder and remember when nobody thought you would amount to a hill of beans. Look back over your shoulder when folks said you wouldn't make it, and if the truth be told, you doubted your own survival. Don't y'all fool me now. There was a time in your life when you were about to throw in the towel. Remember those pity parties? Don't y'all fool me now. Remember when you didn't think you were going to make it, but turn to your neighbor and said, I must be special. Oh, y'all ain't saying it loud enough. I must be special. You still ain't saying it loud enough. I must be special. Being left for dead doesn't mean you have to die. God is keeping you alive because you are important to God. Lesson number 2. Lesson number 2. And I'm about to quit. Lesson number 2. Please listen. Don't ever forget this. God will bring the right people at the right time across your path. I say it. God will bring the right people at the right time across your path. Can I just say that again? God will bring the right people at the right time across your path.